Hello everybody! Welcome to Season 2, Episode 5 of my guide to Google Spreadsheets. Today we're going to be discussing data validation. To start, we must ask ourselves, what is data validation? Well, data validation is a way to apply certain rules to cells in order to govern what actually goes in them. It's basically a way for you to make sure that you don't input the wrong data into the wrong place, and also a way for you to make sure that in your existing data there isn't any mistakes in what goes where. This can be especially helpful if you have very large data sets that you're still adding to or maintaining. So today we're going to be discussing the different forms of data validation rules that you can create in Google Sheets, and I'll introduce you to 3 different practice problems that you can try in your own time. So let's get right into it. We'll start with checkboxes. This is the most simple data validation rule, and it's probably one which most of you have heard of. In order to create a data validation rule, what we need to do is we just need to select our cells, and then we can click Data, and then Data Validation right here. If we click that, we'll get an extra menu here, and we can add a rule. Then the default option is Dropdown, but we want a checkbox, which we'll have to scroll all the way down for. And right here, checkbox. So if we click this, you'll find a checkbox. And notice when it's checked off, up here it'll assign itself as true. But if you uncheck it, it's now false. So that's how the checkbox works. Internally, it's just 2 separate options, but externally they make it look like a fun little checkbox, which is nice. If you want to change this, however, we can click Use Custom Cell Values. So what this will let us do is, when it's checked, instead of saying true, it might say yes. And when unchecked, it might say no. So if we click done here and then we look, right now it's no, yes, no, yes. What you can also do here is, instead of checked, unchecked, you can use numbers. So this way, you can use this in a formula, have interactions between different cells even though they look externally different. And that's checkboxes for you. Now, dropdowns. We got a glimpse of this already, and most of you watching have probably seen these already because they're also very common in spreadsheets. But basically, it creates a little mini menu here where every time you want to enter anything into these cells, you can choose between these options. Now, like anything in spreadsheets, you can of course change the colors, but that's not as important right now. The main thing is we can change these options or we can add new options. So, what we can do here, if we add an option 3, and then click done, so now we can find we have an option 3, an option 2, and an option 1. But, now, in order to remove a data validation rule, you just go over here and then click this little trash can icon. And now what we can do is, I'll do a short demonstration for you. If we just type something random into each of these cells, A, B, and C, for example, and now we create a new drop-down rule here, add rule. You'll notice that any values that are already in the range when you create the drop-down rule are automatically added into the valid options in the drop-down. So this is extremely useful if you already have a massive data set that you're still adding to, and you want to apply these data validation rules but are worried that it might mess up what you already have. Likely it is that it won't. So what we can do here is we're done with drop-downs. That's about it. So there's text rules. So if we click add rule, go in here, there's a bunch of text rules. These are all very, very straightforward. Valid email and valid URL, these are extremely useful and they're in some of the practice tasks, so get excited for those. So for example, if we do contains, so it has to contain, say, W, the letter W. So if we type in we, it works. If we type in just E, it doesn't work. Notice here, when a data validation rule gets triggered, as in something is invalid, it'll have this little triangle at the edge of the cell. So what we can do in order to change this, for example, so say instead of this triangle you want a more loud warning, right? Into advanced options here, right? What we can do is we can actually just tell it to reject the input. So when we do that, basically if we try and input something that's invalid, right? So You try and input that E again. It gives us this really big warning, like there's a problem. And it doesn't let us input that. So that's another way if you're sharing a massive sheet with someone else and you really don't want them to input the wrong thing in the wrong place, then this is another way to easily govern that. So that's it with text rules. With math rules, also very simple. You can have like greater than or less than equations, basically. It's extremely straightforward. I don't think I need to explain it much. So is equal to 6. If we input something like 7, it's going to flag it, of course. And with dates. Dates are very fun with this. I won't get into too much detail on them, but basically if you have any date option here, and then double click the cell that rule applies to, then what you can do is this little calendar menu pops up and you can pick any of these dates and it'll just apply them in your selected date format, which is very fun. I'll get into more detail on that in my specified video on dates and times. Now, with that information, I think we're ready to move on to custom formulas, so let's do it. So, we're going to add a rule here. Say here the custom rule is, we want it so that whatever is in this cell is equal to this cell plus this cell. So whatever is in the A column is equal to that equivalent cell in the B column plus that equivalent cell in the C column, right? So first we have to select custom formula. So we scroll all the way down, this is all the way at the bottom, they've buried it. We click custom formula is. Now, the thing with this formula that makes it different from other Google Sheets formulae is that the syntax is slightly confusing. What we have to do is we have to start with an equal sign, right? And then after that we write the actual equation. So in theory there's two equal signs in the formula, which makes it very confusing. So we have an equal sign, right? And then what do we want? We want A9. By the way here, it'll apply to the whole range if you only write the case for the topmost row. And then we need another equal sign because we're saying A9 is equal to, and then B9 plus C9. And now, if we click done, this formula is gonna trigger if we put like 3 in here, it's fine, but if we put a 2 in there, it's going off. Same with here, that should be a 7. Notice it still works, even though I only wrote the case for the topmost row. That part isn't much different. And those are all of the basics for data validation. That's all you need to know. And now I'll give you a short introduction to the practice tasks before you get sent off on your way to complete them. The first practice task involves you being in a group project. You're basically using a spreadsheet in order to organize all of your work. And the task here is you want to assign a fitting data validation rule for every single column. Makes sense, right? In practice task 2, you're a math teacher. Basically, you have all of your students' answers to a certain math problem on this Google spreadsheet. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to check all of the results at once without having to go and individually check every single separate result yourself. And you can do that using a data validation rule, of course. And then your final practice task is one where you're organizing a spreadsheet tournament. They exist, by the way. It's extremely cool. Spreadsheets is technically an e-sport, which is just awesome. But basically, you're organizing a spreadsheet tournament, and in this sheet, you're basically setting up a sign-up sheet, right? And you want to apply data validation rules to make sure that whoever's signing up inputs the right information. And that's it for practice. The intended outcome, I'll say, or a description of the intended outcome for each practice task is available at the far rightmost column of each task. So after you've done each task, you can go to the far right of that sheet and just check if your answer is right. And other than that, happy spreadsheeting. I hope to see you back in a few weeks for my next episode. And make sure to like and subscribe.